Hey everybody, I hope y'all are having a good weekend. Mine is doing well so far and I'm working on these stories today, but listen. Diddy's team finally had their day in court on his appeal before a 3-judge panel, right? The judges were there to listen to two arguments. Diddy's team's argument and the argument of the government. So now the wait is on to see what they decide. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? Okay, the government says Judge Submarinian properly considered the aggravated manner during sentencing, but Diddy's attorneys say just the opposite. They say the conduct that the judge referenced was acquitted by a jury of his peers and should not have been considered during sentencing. Okay. TMZ further explains the two arguments and believes that Diddy has a good chance of being released early. The defense's first argument is this. Take a listen.
There is a good chance that Diddy could be eating dinner at his home tonight, a free man. And that's because an appeals court is now hearing the review of the trial in which Diddy was convicted of violating the Mann Act. And his defense lawyers are making two arguments that could sway these judges and make them overturn the conviction. Let me explain both. So the first is that the defense says that the violation of the Mann Act is to prohibit the transportation of prostitutes across state lines, and it's typically for commercial purposes. That's where they've used it before. In this case, the defense is saying this is nothing more than kinky porn, and kinky porn is protected by the First Amendment. Now, that may sound crazy, but I'm going to read you something from their brief. Listen to this. They say, freak-offs and hotel nights were highly choreographed sexual performances involving the use of costumes, role play, and staged lighting, which were filmed so Combs and his girlfriends could watch this amateur pornography later. Pornography production and viewing of this sort is protected by the First Amendment and thus cannot constitutionally be prosecuted. So what they're saying is, look, if you want to use the Mann Act to prosecute people who are moving prostitutes across state lines for commercial transactions, which again is what it's usually used for, that's one thing. But here, there's no commercial purpose. Diddy lost money. He ended up paying the prostitutes. The films were never distributed to anybody. The defense is saying it was for his pleasure and the pleasure of people who may have been participating. So they're saying, look, this is like any porn. It could be OnlyFans. It could be anything like that. And all of that is constitutionally protected and shouldn't be prosecuted. So that's one argument.
So there are two arguments now. So here's the second one. Listen to this.
The second thing they're arguing is that the sentence was totally out of whack, that Diddy got 50 months for violating the Mann Act. And typically, for Mann Act prosecutions, the average is around 15 months. And what the defense is saying is that the trial judge in this case considered all sorts of evidence that he shouldn't have, that the judge, even though Diddy was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, and there was a lot of evidence presented about coercion and force, and the Cassie video was introduced into evidence. The defense is saying none of that should be considered because the Mann Act has nothing to do with that. But they're saying the judge's sentence was colored by all of those things, and the judge threw the book at Diddy when the judge should have just looked at the Mann Act violation and then sentenced appropriately. They're saying the appropriate sentence should have been around 15 months. Well, guess what? Diddy has already served 19 months. So, if either of those arguments fly, if the appellate court believes that this is constitutionally protected porn, or if the appellate court believes that the sentence was out of whack, 15 months is more appropriate, either one of those, Diddy is a free
So
man.
although the hearing was not televised, they did provide a way where the public could hear the audio And from what I heard, y'all, those judges went in on both sides. They went in on Diddy's attorneys, and they also went in on the Christy Slavic, the government's attorney. They went in on her so hard, y'all. Take a listen to this audio, because and he made a point there. Listen to this.
Christy Slavic represented the government at trial, provided her own arguments, but she also got some pushback from the appeals judges.
Judge Subramanian properly considered the aggravated manner in which the defendant carried out his Mann Act offenses, which is, of course, consistent.
You say aggravated manner. Let's talk about that. Why shouldn't we hold you to the way you prosecuted the case? You went to the jury and you said, this man did all these terrible things for purposes of the RICO conspiracy, for purposes of sex trafficking, and they acquitted him. And then on the Mann Act, it was just a sideshow, and you put in, I don't think there was any evidence or any live witness testimony. Just look at this, you said, look at these charts. And now you want us to rely on all this acquitted conduct that was presented to the jury that was presumably rejected for purposes of, or to allow a district court for purposes of the guidelines calculation. So why shouldn't we hold you to what you argued to the jury?
So I've been hearing that there are new guidelines in place that don't allow judges to do that, to use acquitted conduct during sentencing. So listen to this, because I found this interview where they're talking about that. So I want y'all to listen to this video real quick.
Why do this? Well, they argue, like you said, that Judge Subramanian looked at Combs's life, the domestic violence against Cassie Ventura and Jane, who testified under a pseudonym. He looked at Combs's drug use, and that he looked at all of these things that he'd been acquitted of, and that he should not have factored that into sentencing. And like you pointed out, those new guidelines don't allow judges to do that. So it will be interesting to see if the Court of Appeals does decide to either overturn the conviction and release him, or at least have him be released on time served. Though I want you to take a listen to something that one of the prosecutors said today.
The threats are not followed by a request to go to dinner, a request to, ask Cassie to do the dishes. Those threats are followed by a demand for a freak off.
You hear the prosecutors saying that this is ridiculous, that he should be released under the First Amendment, that he had the book thrown at him. They're saying that the judge made the right call, and even if he hadn't looked at the acquittals that he got during the trial, that he still would have come to the same decision, which was 50 months in prison. I just want to point out that Alexandra Shapiro, who is Combs's lead attorney when it comes to this appeal, she is very famous. She has a very successful track record, and Combs had a lot of money to pay for this legal dream team, and she was in that courtroom every single day this summer waiting for this moment, which was today. So she was very prepared. I could potentially see this going in Combs's favor, because the argument on his side was very strong.
It's going to take some time, though, right? Even though they want it fast.
They're asking for it to be expedited, because like you pointed out, he's going to be released in 2028, so they need an answer now.
There's already time served as well. Chloe Malas.
So now let's hear from an attorney. Let's see, because, the court of public opinion will have all types of things to say, but let's see what a legal professional has to say. Mark Garricos represented Diddy in the past on some other cases, and this is what he had to say. He says that he thinks there's a potential for early release, and the prosecution should actually be penalized for overcharging him in the first place. Okay, watch this.
Let's turn now to someone who's already had their day in court. Sean Diddy Combs is now asking for an appeals court for immediate release, saying that the judge defied the jury's verdict during sentencing. As someone who represented Combs before, you think he'll be successful?
I will tell you something. Part of one of the lessons that trial brought to me was just how effective his appellate lawyer, Alexandra Shapiro, is. She's the one who authored this brief. I've known Alexandra for a while, and I will tell you, she's one of the more impressive legal minds that I've encountered in 43 years of practice. Having said that, I think this brief reads compellingly. I think they've already somewhat expedited it or granted her request for an expedited appeal. Number one, that's a good sign. Number two, she's asked for immediate release. I think there's a potential there. Remember, when he was convicted of these two Mann Act violations, if you took a look at this, he actually rolled the dice. He won against the counts that carried a mandatory life sentence and would have basically forfeited his entire fortune. So he rolled the dice and won, and then he was enhanced in his sentence by the very conduct he was acquitted of. I think that's fundamentally unfair. In fact, if you want to talk about fairness, I think the prosecution should be penalized for overcharging him in the first place, and he should have been immediately released.
Yeah, because some people say it was an overcharge, because how do you charge one person with a RICO? Y'all know RICOs are mainly for, organizations. Whole organizations get charged with RICOs for committing multiple crimes over the years, right? But they had one man that they're charging with a RICO. And so many people feel like that was just an overcharge, like right off the jump, right? So that was just way, way too much. Okay. So that's what Diddy's former attorney had to say about it. So now let's talk about someone who was actually involved in the freak-offs. Okay. This is what the video that I'm going to play now is called, is from the exotic dancer, whose real name is Sheree Hayes, but he goes by the Punisher. He was hired by Diddy and Cassie for the freak-offs, for the hotel nights or whatever you want to call it, right? And he says it was simply amateur porn. It was very choreographed. It was the lighting, the positioning, and everything. He never felt like a victim. He never saw any distress from Cassie. And he believes himself that Diddy was over-sentenced. It was overblown, okay? Listen to this.
Your thoughts on that? Was it amateur pornography?
Well, when I look back to it, it was a very choreographed, kind of streamlined scenario. And there was a lot of focus on the lighting, body positions. And I think I was not aware that I was filmed. I found that after the fact. But I can see where it was definitely something that was set up to be kind of captured in a certain way. So it might be some credence to that.
When you hear the way it's described today, when you hear the way it was described at trial, do you feel like a victim? Do you feel like this was a crime?
So I don't. In terms of my interactions, with all the details coming out, it almost sounds embarrassing to say, but it was something as a guy and interacting with this beautiful woman for thousands of dollars. It was something I was like almost proud of in terms of like bragging rights with the buddies. It was really shocking to me when all of the allegations came out and it became such a bigger thing. But I cannot look back and say any of my interactions, because nothing felt uncomfortable in regards to her energy, the energy that I received in interacting, that made me feel like anything that, if there was no allegations, it would be something I wouldn't think twice of.
Look, I'm going to get into the law on this in a minute with Mark Garagos. But essentially, generally speaking, the way the argument broke down today is how serious is it what he was convicted of, right? I mean, the defense would say, yeah, these are crimes, but you look at other people who are convicted of it, they didn't get this kind of prison time. It's not racketeering. It's not sex trafficking. It's not an egregious kind of crime. Whereas the prosecution was saying, no, this was really bad. This happened multiple times. There were elements of violence. There were elements of drugs. You will listen to the arguments today, not even getting into the law, but just listening to it. How serious do you think it is what he ended up being convicted of? How serious do you think it is, these freak-offs, these hotel nights?
Honestly, man, I don't think it's serious at all. I think everything was overblown. My interactions, as I testified to, I didn't see any signs of distress. And then in the interim, since the trial, I've actually spoke to other guys that were involved in the actions and parts of it. And we all, nothing that I can point blank see as it being anything more than a couple having fun in a kind of kink type of way, but not anything that I could even begin to say that I saw a crime or anything that is warrants these type of charges.
So let me ask you this. If this panel says, you know what, he shouldn't have been sentenced to this, I think he should be released. Or you know what? Send it back down. He gets resentenced, let's say to time served. Let's say his convictions get thrown out. Let's say Sean Diddy Combs becomes a free man before April 2028. How would you feel?
I would feel it's warranted. I mean, I was actually at the sentence hearing, and I was shocked that he was not released with time served, and even more blown away when I heard 50 months. There were precedent cases thrown out there with people who were actually pimps that made millions of dollars, and in their convictions they got 25 months, 27 months. So I was really like completely confused when I saw 50 months associated with his sentence.
You know Sean Combs is facing litigation. You heard people testifying against him at trial. To those who say, Mr. Hayes, I disagree with you. I feel like a victim. I feel what he did was a crime. I feel like I was victimized by what he did. What would be your answer to them who say, no, I think 50 months is appropriate?
Well, what my answer to them is I'm going to look at it strictly on the precedents and strictly on what he's convicted of. And when you talk about the Mann Act, which is transportation of prostitution, and there's no precedent where if anybody got 50 months or even half of that is the norm in extreme cases. I'm sorry, as somebody who, any of us can be in a scenario where something happens in our life and we have a court deciding our future. And precedents are there for a reason, and for a guy to get an excessive amount of time for a crime that people get much lesser penalties is just unfair. And I'm speaking on the fairness of it. I'm not trying to disparage anybody's experience, but precedents are there for a reason.
Well, listen, you have a...
So anytime you have a conversation about Diddy, I think it's important to not forget about the alleged victims. So I wanted to know what's being said about the alleged victims in this case, and how they're feeling about the possibility of an early release for him. Okay, so listen to this video.
What are, victims and their families saying about this? What's been the response to today's hearing and the potential of a release?
I think a lot of people are terrified, frankly. I mean, he was quite violent towards Cassie. He was quite violent towards a lot of the other women. And people are worried about retribution because he does have a history of intimidation.
So, and to that, I'll say he would be a fool to get out and try to intimidate anybody on anything that was said about him. He needs to just let that go, because if this hadn't taught him a lesson, I don't know what will. I know he's praying night and day to get out. He's been in there, 2 years now, just about? That's a long time for a high-profile celebrity like Diddy, who's not even used to this. Last time he had this type of lifestyle, it was back when before he made it, before he became Diddy. So for him to get out and try to intimidate somebody, I hope I'm wrong, but I hope they're wrong for thinking that, because I seriously doubt it. I really think that he don't want to go back to prison, okay? Because now they're going to be watching him even more, and if you do any slight thing, they're going to find a reason to lock his behind back up again. So to the alleged victims, I hope that you don't have that issue when he is released. So, and I don't think he will. I think this taught him a major lesson. He got to get back to his luxury. He don't want to be locked down in no prison. But anyway, so the result of this hearing, 3 things could happen. They made the decision to they actually make the decision to throw the convictions out. Could be one thing that the judges do. They could re-sentence him for a lesser sentence, because that 50 months is too long. They should give him, something shorter than that. And if they do lessen his sentence, that means he could actually get out on time served, because he's already been in there almost 2 years now. So, or they could keep everything the same. Let him serve his 50-month sentence, which I know that's what Diddy and his team is not wanting to happen. But so we don't know, and it could take weeks for a decision is made, but we'll be watching closely for updates. I don't know how this is going to end, but I think just like the guy on TMZ and the other legal professionals feel like he has a good chance of getting his sentence reduced. So when you look at all of the arguments, I just feel like Diddy's team has a stronger argument. So it may fall in his favor, and if so, he'll be getting released early. So that could be a good thing for his family too. I know they waiting to see their dad. They haven't, been able to spend time with in a long time. So I don't know, y'all, but that's my little update on the Diddy's appeal hearing. And I will be back on here to post more things. As I learn more, I'll get on here and post it. And y'all continue to have a good weekend, okay? Bye now.